So I am Ryan Pat.
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
And I'm Brandice Wilson.
And this is Soundtrack for Life, where we talk to a guest about a soundtrack that they feel connected to. Returning to the podcast is Austin from I Hate Your Taste in Movies. She was our guest for our episode on Annie, and along with her co-host Jen, she was our guest for Love Actually. But today we are going to talk about the 2001 and 2004 films Shrek 1 and Shrek 2. Nicole kind of selected these movies.
Kind of.
But Austin, why are you joining us today?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm excited to be back. I kind of signed myself up for this unintentionally by replying to a tweet. So, I mean, it was fun to kind of go back and listen to the soundtracks and watch the movies again. I was surprised at some of my feelings towards both of them, but I still think that the soundtracks are really good, so I'm excited to talk about them.
And so, Nicole, why did you want to talk about these movies?
Well, to be honest, this started as a little bit of a punk because sometimes when Ryan goes on vacation, he leaves me the keys to the social accounts. And so when he left me the keys to Twitter, I'm like, well, I'm just going to see who wants to hear about the Shrek soundtracks, because I feel like they're both like lauded, loved, and also super divisive. So it would be really fun to talk about the Shrek soundtracks. And of course, there's like this overwhelmingly like, yeah, hell yeah, you should talk about Shrek on this podcast. So that's sort of how it kicked off. But I was telling Ryan before we started recording, I think I've done more research and gone down more rabbit holes for Shrek than I have for anything else we've ever recorded. And I too was very surprised by, some of my feelings and some of the nostalgia I felt towards Shrek and the associated artists on the Shrek soundtrack. I think before we get to that, though, I kind of want to know from the group, like, are we Shrek movie fans? How do we feel about the Shrek cinematic universe?
Well, that's a loaded question.
That's why I asked it.
I know who you're primed for, but Ryan, you're about to say something, so I'll let you go first.
No, I want to hear what you have to say.
All right. Me, negative Nelly here. I was actually kind of shocked because, first of all, let's all acknowledge that there are actually 4 Shrek movies. Yes, 4. All theatrical release, all the original voiceover talent. This is not like a straight to DVD situation. I have not seen the 4th Shrek movie. I think I've seen the 3rd one once and do not remember it. And everyone else is kind of on the same boat. So we'll only be talking about Shrek 1 and 2. But both of those I saw a ton of times when they first came out when I was like a kid. And I remember loving them so much. So when I heard we're doing Shrek, I was like, cool. And then upon rewatch for this, like yesterday and this morning, I was like, oh no. No. What was I thinking? First one, absolutely hated. I was so bored. I was like, can I skip ahead? And then I was like, oh wait, no, I'm rewatching this for a specific reason. I can't skip ahead because I need to know how the music weaves into the storyline. Second one, I'm a lot better with. It's a lot less anticlimactic. It has a lot more unique storytelling. I liked the sort of meta references and jokes. And as far as soundtrack, hated the soundtrack for the first one. Second one, I liked a lot better. So I'll give second movie, soundtrack and movie B+. First one, I don't even know. C, D, something, hated universally across the board. But I know that you guys are totally in a different camp, so feel free to hate on me.
Well, I wouldn't say that, although I just want to point out that I really appreciate your commitment to fighting through your disgust so that you can continue to do this podcast with us. So we thank you for
my sacrifice.
Yeah, I didn't know this would get train spotting levels of hate.
Okay, no, it was not train spotting levels, to be clear.
I want to know what Ryan thinks about Shrek. So Ryan, you just rewatched it as well. I've kind of recently rewatched it because we both have kids. So there's this thing of let's pull that off the shelf and see how that plays.
Oh, I also wanted to point out, not to out anyone's age, but I think that Nicole and I, when Shrek came out, were adult aged, but clearly not adults. While I think Austin and Brandice were the target demographic as kids or not adults. So I think that plays into it. I remember watching it with a friend of mine in college, and this is going to date us. So we went to Blockbuster Video to buy it, and then we found an older kid to buy us a 6 pack of Smirnoff Ice so we could watch it in my dorm room
Oh, you
and
got
drink.
iced and watched Shrek? What a
Yeah, we got
great
iced, and
memory.
then after the second bottle, I remember my friend saying my teeth really hurt from all the sugar. So I don't think I'm going to have the third bottle. But I thought it was really clever back in 2001. And upon rewatching it, I was surprised that even though some of the jokes are a little bit dated, that it is still a very fresh and clever movie. And I didn't realize that in 2001 that it premiered at Cannes and got a 12-minute standing ovation.
Yeah, that was part of the rabbit hole that I dug for myself, is that it actually did remarkably, it was remarkably well received at Cannes, and that they were really nervous that the filmmakers were like, well, great, well, we have like an ogre farting in a swamp at Cannes. I don't really think that this is going to be any sort of success, but it actually did just fine, and obviously went on to make like $1 zillion. So
How much of like the CGI and like the new technology and like new forms of storytelling had anything to do with that though?
I think, and this is something that I think is important to point out about Shrek. Shrek's what, like 23 years old now, somewhere around that marker. I think at the time it was a fresh concept because it was explicitly anti Disney, and it was explicitly this fractured fairy tale, right? So, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who used to be an executive at Disney, formed Dreamworks and had it out for Michael Eisner, who was at that time the head of Disney. They had a huge falling out. They did not get along. It's sort of common knowledge that the villain in Shrek, Lord Farquaad, is Michael Eisner. So I kind of love that. I kind of love that there is this like major like fuck you to big Disney that is pervasive throughout these films. That they were kind of like bold enough to do something that was very much in the face of what traditional animation had been up to that point, but also what animated films relied on in terms of score and in terms of soundtracks. But I want to know, Austin, like, what are your memories? What's your kind of like nostalgia hit with Shrek?
Yeah, I mean, I was, like you said, the target demographic. I was 10 when the first one came out. So, which I feel like is a good age for it because you're a little bit older. So, like, you're not super young. So, the jokes, for the most part, you get, but you get to feel a little bit adult with the, because I know that's the other big thing with Shrek is it's like, oh, there's the humor for the adults and all this, which I think is true to an extent. And I think when you're 10 and watching it, you get to kind of feel like you're in on the joke and that you're more like older. I don't know. I remember being like, oh, I'm so smart. I get these like more adult references, you know? So definitely watched it when it came out in theaters. I don't specifically remember, and I was surprised when I rewatched it how well I remembered it because I don't remember watching it many times. I must have, but like I was watching it a couple days ago and I was quoting it, and then I did not expect that because I don't have a strong memory of the first one. And then the second one, I definitely remember the soundtrack more than I remembered the movie as well. So they're just movies that like I definitely watched a lot when I was younger and when they came out. I wouldn't say they had a huge impact on me, but when I was rewatching them, I was pleasantly surprised at how well I remembered them and how much I still enjoyed them. Even though, yeah, like you said, there's some dated stuff in there. There's some stuff that doesn't really work as well today as it did then. But I had a good time watching them, to be honest.
It's interesting that you said you remember the soundtrack better than the film, because that was me too. Like Ryan, because we're the same age cohort. I also remember probably being in a dorm room, like getting lit on Smirnoff Ice. So that was more our experience with Shrek, is that we were probably like a little too old for it and a little bit cynical about animation to begin with. So I'm sure I wasn't like the prime target audience for it yet. I can distinctly remember having that soundtrack on CD, and I think the reason that I had it on CD is because of Hallelujah and because of Rufus Wainwright. I think it might have been at that time like maybe the one of the ways that you could get like that particular song. I was really into him as an artist. I didn't know shit about Leonard Cohen. So for me, I'm this like young, struggling Smirnoff-y adult that is like, oh, cool. This is like a gateway to something that I don't understand, because it took these kind of like big swings and risks in its soundtrack. Like people know it for Smash Mouth. Like I think the most people are like, well, Shrek gave us Smash Mouth, which is true, but it also gave us a lot of other weirder things, I think.
Yeah, and I
Absolutely.
read that Smashmouth made a huge,
Do you
like they kept rejecting the offer to use All Star in the movie. They were very like protective of the song, which is kind of funny because it's been memed to death at this point. But they're like, "Can we see a cut of it?" And they're like, "You're not a DreamWorks employee, so we can't give it to you." And so the story is,
Nice.
so they had reservations about it, so they went to a different DreamWorks artist, or they went to a DreamWorks artist, Matt Mahaffrey from Self. And since he was on the label, they actually let him watch a cut of the movie, and he made a song for it. But when they tested it with the audience, it just did not hit as well as All Star. And then finally, they had Smash Mouth watch it. Like they flew someone on a plane with a copy of it on VHS to show the band, and then finally they okayed it. And now I think they're thankful for it. I think this has to be an exaggeration. They said for 20 years at every show, there's at least one person who dresses up as Shrek.
Shut up.
That is amazing. I love that they're like so discerning, and the number one reason why I love that they're on this soundtrack is because it's so like annoying and broad that I think it fits the movie so well. Like I think that's my number one complaint of the first movie is I love the digs at Disney and I love being that anti-fairy tale, but I feel like they went like 10 or 15%. Like the two parts that I see that are distinctly anti-Disney was when they were like had the 45-minute wait with like the stanchions, and then that like intro thing to the town with like the small little like dolls that's obviously knocking on It's a Small World. And I feel like those moments and like really just making an anti-fairy tale is like what was so special. But on the whole, the actual storytelling narrative was still very fairy tale. It was still very basic. And then as for the soundtrack, like I felt that, for the record, hate Smash Mouth. Even like the cover of like I'm a Believer, like both of them so obnoxious, but I feel like tonally it fits the movie so well. Like you need that grating, broad, just like really obnoxious earworms, you know, that really fits the tone of like the movie Shrek, but also the character of Shrek. And I felt like all the rest of the songs were trying too hard. They were like too serious and they just didn't have that like tone that was right. And so I would have loved for like the soundtrack to have like dug in more on just being like super loud and obnoxious, and like for the storytelling to like do the same thing. Like I wanted them to take the concept of Shrek and like fully run with it.
For the record, Brandice called Shrek a basic bitch.
I did. It is absolutely basic bitch. And I think that's why the second movie works better, is because they dug in more on like the meta references and they got a little bit like more like gnarly, and the music was a little bit, I think, tonally like more correct. There were still some songs that I felt like, oh yeah, it's still trying to be like a legitimate soundtrack here, but like still I think that they like ran with it more in the second one. Like they had more confidence, and I wish that they would have done that in the first one.
Well, it's interesting that you said that, right? Because I think the tonal thing is maybe due in part to some of the like the approach that they took to this. I was reading all of these accounts of how they put the first soundtrack together, and apparently the filmmakers really just kind of sat around along with Michael Eisner too, and we're kind of going by ear and what they loved and make. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. It's like a really bad fuck up. Yeah. No, the other guy, the other Disney guy who is also like a white executive. Anyway, so they sat around in a room and were just like, I really like this CD. I really like this song. I really like this artist. And I think they were really putting together more of a mixtape. And what they had said was, we weren't really inspired by other animated soundtracks, and we're more kind of into like a Tarantino approach. And I think you can kind of feel that there's more of this approach to soundtracks for film. They wanted to create needle drop moments. They wanted to make needle drops a thing for animation. So I think there was really kind of like there's a hit and miss thing with that, right? It was new. And so they tried it. And I think some of it works out great. Some of it maybe lives a little bit better on the soundtrack than it does against picture.
I'm just like, how do you put Hallelujah and Smash Mouth on the same like soundtrack? Like, I'm sorry, but in what world does someone want to listen to both of those things? Either you're like in the camp of appreciating Hallelujah, or you're like, I really love Smash Mouth.
Well, I mean, okay, so what's our tolerance level for All Star by Smash Mouth or I'm a Believer, which is the cover? Like, what do we like it? Do we hate it?
In the movie, 100%. In real life, independent of the movie, negative 100%.
Like, Austin, are you listening to like Smash Mouth recreationally?
What's embarrassing is that I do have Smash Mouth's I'm a Believer on my running playlist. So I do listen to it in real life more than I mean, I guess I just admitted it, but more than I would care to admit. It's a good song for a running playlist.
I'll allow that. Workout music is not like the same as like, oh, I really enjoy sitting around listening to this music.
I couldn't tell you any other Smash Mouth songs, I guess. So I'm not actively seeking out their music. Yeah.
I think it's also important to remember for context that the reason, to Ryan's point about Smash Mouth having kind of all of this like sway and pull and them being so sought after for this is that they were like super ubiquitous at this point. Like they were a big band. They were a big deal. So at that moment, having Smash Mouth on your soundtrack meant attention for your movie. And it meant that in the test screenings, audiences were like, cool, I'm wild about this because I already know this song. Had they gone with the track by Self, which is actually a legit song, and it ends up in the end credits for Shrek 1, had they gone that direction, who knows if Shrek would have taken off the way that it did.
Oh, again, I'm saying I am arguing for Smash Mouth in the context of the movie and against Hallelujah. I forgot that song was in this movie. And when it started playing, I was like, oh my God.
You're like, what the hell?
Happened?
Well, okay. So interesting thing about Hallelujah film too, because I could do a whole other podcast on Hallelujah. And next time I run the Twitter, that's probably what I'll ask y'all to vote on. But Hallelujah in this movie is the John Cale version of Hallelujah. Allegedly because they thought it was like the most depressing version, essentially. Like, oh, this is like a total bummer and it's not pretty, it's not beautiful the way like the Rufus Wainwright version is. So John Cale ends up in the movie, Rufus Wainwright's version ends up on the soundtrack.
And it's like one of the first times that it was licensed for TV or film.
Wait, seriously? I feel like I hear it all the time now. Again, not that I don't love that song. I love that song. I am just like, what the hell is it doing in this movie?
It's one of Shrek's legacies.
Wow.
It's Shrek's legacy. What you don't know is that Shrek did that shit because at that point, nobody's talking about Leonard Cohen. Nobody's using Hallelujah in film and TV. Since Shrek came out, that has been used a minimum of 46 times in film and television, that song.
Shrek walked so everyone else could run.
I think that's the whole quote
Shrek
for
is
social.
The face that launched 1,000 ships.
I do think though a lot of it is that though, where you kind of forget that like when it came out, it was kind of revolutionary. That's maybe too strong of a word, but like it did a lot of things for the first time, and now it's kind of mundane, and we see that all the time. But I think it's easy to forget that it really did kind of set a new standard.
Yeah, we're so jaded now that we don't realize that Shrek broke open a lot of things for Shrek lumbered so that we could run and also be like super bummed out by Leonard Cohen.
Yeah. It's just such a serious song for like the least serious movie of all time.
But that's why I love it. I love it because it goes there. And we haven't even talked about Shrek 2 yet, which I think tonally is way darker, grittier, weirder, has a way weirder list of artists.
So let me tie Shrek 1 and Shrek 2 together. So Shrek 2 has a Tom Waits song on the soundtrack. Shrek 1, they wanted to have a Tom Waits song when Donkey and Shrek are looking at the clouds, but they were too concerned that audiences would think that Tom Waits' voice is Shrek trying to sing.
Which is like a Cookie Monster thing, because he sounds like Cookie Monster. I don't know if you guys have seen that mashup.
No, but he has like the most gravelly voice.
Yeah, I get it, kind of.
But like, I like that they were like, oh no, like kids might be like, oh, is that Shrek trying to sing?
That's terrifying. And why am I in like a terrifying carnival? I'm 10.
Shrek sounds like a
They
chain
needed to
smoker.
reserve Conway.
Love it. I will say for the second one, I do think the soundtrack works more. I think tonally it was more on point. I have a personal beef of I actually really love the song I Need a Hero, but I did not like the versions that were used for either in the film nor on the credit roll. They used like two totally different versions, but neither like the original. And I was very offended by that.
I'm sorry, can we talk a little bit more about why you're so attached to the song I Need a Hero?
I have like very weird random songs that I'm attached to. I don't know why. I just really love that song. I can't explain it. There is no like moment in time where I heard it and it was like this life-changing moment and therefore it like stuck with me for the rest of my life. Like I just randomly like it. And then I forgot that like it was in this movie because when I'm a kid, I'm not like familiar with it, right? So then upon this rewatch, I was like, oh yes, love this song. Wait, no, what are you doing to it? No, make it stop.
I love how you're like, no, Smashmouth too corny for me, but holding out for a hero, right in my zone.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm trying to remember what song it was. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the soundtrack right now. But there was a time I was doing like bar trivia and there was a music round and one of the songs that's on the Shrek 2 soundtrack came up and I got into an argument with my friend. I was like, because it was a cover on the Shrek 2 soundtrack, but I was like really getting into it. I was like, it's this song. She's like, that's not the artist. That's not the original artist. I was like, you better put Shrek 2. But no, it's fine.
Well, let's talk about Shrek 2. So I feel like Shrek 2, at least in terms of finding interesting artists, it far exceeds its predecessor. It's pretty legit. It's got David Bowie doing a new version of Changes. So just again, I think to go back in time and really level set on the kind of cultural power that this movie franchise had, they got David Bowie to record a new version of Changes for Shrek 2. It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
It's got Pete Yorn. It's got Nick Cave. It's got Tom Waits twice. I think it's got Tom Waits.
It's got Dashboard Confessional.
It's got Dashboard. It has the Buzzcocks. The Buzzcocks are on a Shrek soundtrack. It has Counting Crows, which I will be an apologist for.
Yeah, and they got Adam Duritz to write a song for Shrek 2. It wasn't just a Counting Crow song. It was like, we need you to write a song for this movie. And he said, okay.
He was like, that's fine. It worked for Smash Mouth. It's a song called Accidentally in Love. It is a nice little ditty. I think that Adam Duritz knows his way around like a perfectly pleasant melody. So I think it kind of works in this context. Yeah, I just think it's a very weird, interesting, moody soundtrack, especially for a kid's movie, ostensibly a kid's movie.
Yeah, they threw a lot of money at this one. I think that like all the execs were like, first one did really well. We know that these types of like blockbuster sequels always do better. We can afford to spend the money, and it paid off because it like killed in the box office. And yeah, no, they threw a lot of more money like at this second soundtrack.
Yeah, and with the first one, I feel like there was a little bit of like shoehorning in some Dreamworks artists to kind of, probably offset the amount of money they had to pay Smashmouth for All Star and to do I'm a Believer. I think Smashmouth didn't want to do it, and then they had like their album got pushed back, so they had some extra time, and then finally they relented. I'm sure like it was not as complicated as this, but it makes them sound out like total divas. Like no, we don't want to do it.
Right? Like all I'm hearing is Smashmouth saying no, don't want to do it. No, like we're sticks in the mud. We don't want to do it. Yeah, David Bowie's like, sign me up.
What's so funny about that too is that in retrospect, now it's like, artists tell histories of whether or not they get approached for the Shrek soundtrack, and it's like a badge of honor that you're part of the Shrek soundtrack. I love talking about Billy Corgan beef because Billy Corgan has beef with everyone for absolutely like the thinnest reasons. But apparently Billy Corgan told this story where he claims that Smashing Pumpkins were approached to do the end credit song for Shrek 1, which became the I'm a Believer cover from Smash Mouth. And he made this kind of like big deal about, like we would have used the song called Untitled, would have been a way darker direction. And then Smash Mouth comes forward and was like, actually, no. It always belonged to us, and they called us for months. So Billy Corgan, you're like full of shit, was essentially their response, which I think is fucking funny to have like Smashmouth fighting over street cred for Shrek. John Bryan is credited as a producer on the Shrek soundtracks,
Right.
which is really interesting. That's level of cred that you don't often find with film, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he produced that Eel song, which was on their album Beautiful Freak, which had Novocaine for the Soul, which had that Mark Romantic video. And if you have the Mark Romantic video set from the director's label, there's that commentary with Chris Rock was like, you have Mark Romantic doing Jay-Z videos and Madonna videos, and then the motherfucking Eels?
Let's put some respect on the Eels name, though. I feel like I don't know if their associations with Shrek held them back or propelled them forward, because how many Shrek soundtracks do the Eels appear on, Ryan?
They're on the first 3.
I'm not super familiar with them aside from these songs, but if I'm not mistaken, this is like maybe one of the good parts about the Shrek the Third soundtrack is like, because on the second one there's the I Need Some Sleep song, and then if I'm not mistaken, one of the first songs out of the third one is the first line is like I got some sleep, so that's kind of a cute little touch. I know we're not really talking about the third one, but
that's okay. I mean, it's a through line, you know.
They're a really clever band. They're an LA band. Probably didn't get as big as maybe they should have been, but I think he started playing a lot of shows at Largo when that first started with John Bryan. That's where that connection comes in. But I remember hearing that they played one of those like radio festival shows, like I think it was a K-Rock, like almost Acoustic Christmas or something, and it was one of those shows where they have the rotating stage. So like one band would finish, and then the next band would rotate the stage, and the next band would be ready to go. And the band before them was, they're finishing their song, and the stage started rotating, and the Eels finished the song for them. And so I don't know. I've always I'm not like the hugest Eels fan, but I've always really enjoyed like hearing about them. Like if they had success, I was happy for them because it seemed like they were a talented group of guys, or at least he's a talented guy. And he has that really depressing album where like it's about how everyone in his family has cancer.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean they're one of those bands that like you kind of know and that have had a lot of staying power, which is interesting. And they have this weird connection to the Shrek soundtrack. They have a song in the first Shrek soundtrack called My Beloved Monster. So I think that's maybe one of the more, explicitly fitting songs. And it's really fun. And I remember really liking it when I owned that CD. And of course I didn't know the Eels either at that time. So I think when you talk about soundtracks as a gateway to other things, certainly kind of peels the onion for you, which I feel like is an appropriate reference here.
Parfait, Nicole. It peels the parfait.
The parfait. But to go back to Shrek 2 for a second, I feel like Shrek 2 is a funny one because it's got a lot of things that are very traditionally, you would expect them from a really silly animated film soundtrack, right? It's got Eddie Murphy and Antonio Banderas doing Living La Vida Loca, right? Which could not be like a more early aughts culture. It's got like Lips Incorporated's Funky Town. Like it's a really weird mix of like, you're going to find Funky Town. You're also going to find Tom Waits. So is that sort of part of what feels off to you, Brandice, that it's like this, maybe that feels like too big a bridge?
No, she only feels that way about the first one.
Yeah, I only feel that way about the first one. The second one, I mean, I don't think every song fit perfectly, but I do think they did a much better job of making sure that all the songs like fit tonally with the whole overall theme of like the film, right? Like it's not just about like the moment. Like again, going back to like Hallelujah. Like yes, it was supposed to be this like depressing, sad moment, like they're like broken up and like et cetera, et cetera. But it's like overall, like is that really like the tone of the film? Versus in the second one, it's like they both fit the songs to the moment, but they also fit it to what is the genre of this film. Right. And like I said, I think that there were like a couple where I was like, but there weren't any where I was like, oh God, that was like a huge like record scratch moment. What is this doing in there? I thought the second one was like totally fine music wise. And yeah, loved Eddie Murphy and Antonio Banderas doing Livin' La Vida Loca. Like, that was absolutely great.
I just want to come out and say, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I feel like this is my favorite thing Eddie Murphy's ever done. I absolutely love Donkey. I think he makes the films. I think without Donkey, you have a way lesser version of Shrek.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, Donkey has to be Eddie Murphy, but it's still not my favorite Eddie Murphy thing. I like was a diehard Eddie Murphy fan, like back in the day as a kid. Like, he did so many things that like I loved. But I do think he did an extraordinary job as Donkey, and I loved Antonio Banderas as Puss in Boots. And I just want to say that the writers and the animators of the second movie were clearly cat people, because they nailed Puss in Boots as a cat like 120%. And I think that's what I like respect and appreciate most about that film, is cat was on point.
Yeah, I think you're really just a Puss in Boots fan. But you're right. I think that's why Puss in Boots kind of took on a life of its own and became its own spin-off in the SCU, the Shrek cinematic universe.
Yeah, but it's another one of those things of like, too much of a good thing isn't like really great, right? Like, you can't just like hang an entire movie on like this one character that's done better in like smaller dollops. It's like anytime you're trying to take like that character who's like a total like scene stealer, and then you make them like and they're in their own movie, and like it never really works out quite as well, because then they're just like less special if you're seeing them on camera all the time.
It's a digression. I have not seen the most recent Puss in Boots movie, but I hear it's good.
I saw a hilarious tweet about it. Some film professor was like, I asked my students how many times they saw Avatar over the winter break, and one of my students raised their hand and says, I didn't see Avatar, but I watched Puss in Boots 6 times in theaters.
But see, this is a testament to, I think, the staying power of the Shrek cinematic universe, because people, it's kind of like Minions in a way, where I feel like there's a generation of people that will see any product of that franchise just kind of like out of obligation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just kind of like part of who you are if you grew up with it. So you're predisposed to liking it, even if the latest iteration kind of sucks.
I think it's always like that familiarity too. Like, you know what the formula is, you know what you're going to be in for. You know, there's not going to be any sort of like crazy like marketing like bait and switches where you think you're going in for like a comedy and then they jerk the rug out from under you. Like, it's nice to like know what you're in for, right? So I think that's like plays a lot into it as well with like these sort of like bigger franchises.
So one thing that I think is really funny is the first Shrek soundtrack. The supervisor is Mary Lotta Elton, who did like Ghostbusters, like very, very well established. I think she was like, they gave her like some president title of music at Dreamworks for film, because you know she's a big deal. And I feel like whenever we have like a big name music supervisor like Kathy Nelson, Brandice is like, everything they chose was terrible.
Guaranteed.
That's so interesting. Yeah, well, I think that maybe it's the commercial aspect of things too, right? Like, never underestimate the power of a test screening. Had there not been a test screening for this film, we'd have a very different opening intro for Shrek. And who knows? So.
Yeah, I think they also wanted to use Season of the Witch in Shrek 1.
Yeah, they had been kind of putting it in as a kind of scratch track, as it were, right? Like, seeing how that fit. And I can see that. I'm actually surprised it didn't get used, because Season of the Witch by Donovan is another one of those songs that's like totally ubiquitous in film. It just gets used for everything and for trailers, because it's got such a like moodiness to it.
They just ended up using it in I Shot Andy Warhol instead, which is like the same sort of movie.
But yeah, there's a very widespread between, here's some serious songs from people like Nick Cave, and you know, here is Jennifer Saunders from Absolutely Fabulous singing her version of Holding Out for a Hero as a fairy godmother.
So good.
So it's like it really vacillates wildly between like absolute absurdity and seriousness, which is strange.
I mean, I feel like the songs that Donkey sings in these movies by himself, there's a huge range of songs there too.
Huge range.
That's a good point. Donkey has like a really interesting like taste in music, and that never really like goes into like how is Donkey discovering these songs, and where is Donkey like how did he become attached to these songs that he's singing?
Okay, well, you're imagining like a whole other universe where there is some kind of like fairy tale blockbuster
Well, we
video.
do have an SCU now.
Where
There was like a Gap, there was like a Farbucks, like all those brands existed, but like had analogs. So why not like I can't really come up with a name, but like a blockbuster.
Yeah, Sleeping Beauty's Tower Records.
Exactly. Oh no, they did actually. Tower Records. What was it? Oh man, there was a Tower Records like on this street, and I saw it, but they like messed with the name.
This is how you can tell that Brandice works in advertising.
I know. I was like clocking all of those brand names.
Did you see all the brands in this movies,
How many
guys?
brands?
There was actually a Tower Records.
That's cool. I assume that in the Shrek universe, Donkey's singing "I'm a Believer," and that the band The Monkees is real monkeys. That would be my assumption.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they totally should be real monkeys.
Oh my god, I love that. It would be like the monkeys from like The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just the Jungle Book or something, right? That makes complete sense.
I see no flaw.
No notes.
Airtight.
Before we continue with our episode, here's a word from our sponsor.
Enjoy listening to podcasts and ever wonder, can I make a podcast? But it seems so complicated, and good audio production can take time. What if there was a way to create an amazing podcast easily? Well, now there is. Introducing Podcasting Made Easy from Podtastic Audio. My production team will handle your entire audio production, allowing you to be the star of your show. This is Podcasting Made Easy. How easy? Well, so easy, you don't even have to press record. Now that's easy. Your listeners are waiting. Let's deliver. Sign up for a free strategy call today at podtasticaudio.com/easy.
You had mentioned Funky Town earlier. I have a very embarrassing story about this song, and I really have to share it. I was driving home from work. I would have been like in high school, but I was driving home from work one day, and I guess I was listening to the Shrek 2 soundtrack, and I was singing Funky Town at the top of my lungs, and then as you do. And then I got home and saw that we had a voicemail, and I had apparently butt dialed my house phone, and thank God it went to voicemail, but there was a voicemail of me singing Funky Town. And I'm so glad no one picked up the phone. And I wish I had saved it, but it was so funny.
I was going to say, like, did you save it? Are you, like, sampling it?
I think I just quickly deleted it and pretended it never happened, but now I'm like, oh, I wish I had saved that.
It's incredible.
Should be your ringtone.
It's amazing. I love that. I wish he did save it. Like, that'd be really great.
Yeah. But next time I butt dial while singing Funky Town, I'll be sure to send it to you guys.
Like that, there's some kind of like, I don't know, so there's some songs that trigger that thing in your brain where I must do bad karaoke to this now.
Yeah.
But like, what, are you gonna not sing along to Funky Town? I don't even want to meet a person that wouldn't be willing to sing along to Funky Town.
At the top of their lungs.
Yeah.
Like anyone that sings it not at the top of their lungs, they're not doing it right.
They're not doing it right. Not doing life right.
It's Tower of London Records, guys, right next to the Gap Queen.
Sorry, what is it?
Tower of London Records.
Tower of London Records.
Which is weird. I don't know that I fully approve of like that pun, but
it's not really a fairy tale. I liked my Sleeping Beauty's Tower Records better, but that's a little long. I mean, that doesn't fit on a sign.
Should be like Rapunzel's Tower of Records or like something.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Is that what it is? I'm like, who's in the tower? Which one?
Right.
Which one's in the tower? We'll workshop it. So I do want to say that Shrek came out in an era of, I think a really golden era of soundtracks. Shrek 1 certainly came out in a very stacked year. It actually lost the Best Soundtrack BAFTA to Moulin Rouge, and it lost the Grammy to A Brother, Where Art Thou? Which
one album of the year?
Yeah, so if you're gonna lose to anyone, I feel like losing to those two isn't so bad, but it was nominated, so I think that's a credit to the music in that first film and how I think how interesting it was given like the landscape. So the landscape was people were definitely doing new things with soundtracks.
Yeah, it went double platinum, and it's one of those soundtracks, kind of like the covered this, I think, with Tarzan, where you have people like 20 years later, like tweeting, like, why did they go so hard with the Shrek 1 soundtrack?
Right. That's totally a thing, right? Is that I feel like Shrek lives in meme culture maybe more than it lives in movie or music culture. That's where it has kind of taken on its second life. The idea that these soundtracks go so hard and like absolutely do not have to is funny to me. But I think it also comes from like maybe a sense of real craft and pride that at the time, I think DreamWorks really had something to prove. They didn't want to be Disney. They had something to prove. And I think that's what comes through in these first couple of soundtracks is we want to do the anti that. So even if it's a little bit weird and doesn't totally fit the film, that's okay. That's what we want. And they achieved it.
What's funny is, like, Shrek had been sitting around at DreamWorks for a really long time, and they were trying to figure out how to make it work. And it got a reputation at one point as being the Siberia of DreamWorks. Like, you don't fit on that project. I guess we'll just have you work on Shrek for a while. And at one point in 1997, Chris Farley was kind of cast. He was kind of in their sights to be Shrek instead of Mike Myers, which I understand because, you know, Farley kind of has that sitting on a toilet reading a storybook and ripping out pages sort of vibe all the time. Which is weird. This is the second movie I think we've covered recently where Farley was kind of tapped to be the lead like he was an elf. And then they replaced him with another Saturday Night Live alum. And perhaps for the better. I can't see Shrek as not having that Scottish accent for whatever reason.
That accent came out of nowhere too, didn't it? I think he just did that on his own, Mike Myers. I don't think that was intended.
Yeah, I don't think it was like in the screenplay, like
no,
with Scottish accent. I think he just felt like that's what an ogre would sound like.
Yeah, I think it works because you know how like things that are storybook are like weirdly European, but nobody knows why. Like there's always some like random accent that comes from out of the blue sky. I want to say that he might have been doing like a Scottish character on SNL previous to Shrek. I also remember him doing the Scottish accent in So I Married an Axe Murderer, if anyone remembers that movie. So I think it was his go-to, like, I have this like funny thing in my back pocket, Fat Bastard. It's kind of the Fat Bastard voice as well. So, but it really works here. I can't imagine Mike Myers not being Shrek, which they're just linked forever. There is no world.
Yeah, I love in the second one when Prince Charming is acting like he is Shrek. And then Fiona is like, your voice. Like, I loved that like subtle nod of like, yeah, no one's replacing Mike Myers' voice. Like as Shrek, it's like so unique and like identifiable. I loved that like very subtle like joke in there.
What do we all think of human Shrek?
Human Shrek's weird.
Yeah,
so,
right?
like, I don't have thoughts about human Shrek, but I do like thoughts about all of the men who are supposed to be quote unquote like super hot. It's like this animation style was like a little bit weird because again they're trying to be like not Disney, so they're making people's faces like a little bit more like the caricature style. But I do feel like they did the more like stereotypical like beauty for like the female characters like more on point than they did the men who are supposed to be like classically stereotypically like hot, because all of the quote unquote hot men looked like really weird to me and like with like really creepy like mouths and smiles, and I was like, is he Prince Charming though? Like, is he? And then we're like, Shrek is supposed to be like the hot dude and like all the female like characters are like fawning over him, and I'm like, really? Him?
Yeah.
Like, do these animators not know how to do like a hot animated dude?
I think it's possible that there might have been some limitations to how they animated, human beings at that point too. They were kind of like finding their way. I don't know, Austin, like, would you human Shrek?
Would I what's Human Shrek? No. I mean it was
No.
I kind of forgot that no. I forgot that happened, to be honest. I forgot that entire plot point. I think it was kind of a fun thing for them to do, but yeah, I see what you mean about the kind of weird mouth thing. I feel like all of the characters are a little bit uncanny, I guess, in some ways, but just the animation style.
But I felt like the men were like more uncanny than the women. Because again, those like farmers, like maidens, whatever, like they were fine. Fiona was fine. Like they didn't look like weird, but like the men looked like they were serial killers. Like they were creepy.
They're all looking like Army Hammer. Yeah, no,
Wow.
they sorry. What, do we like Army Hammer? Is it
No.
bad to say bad things about Army Hammer?
Nope.
Nope. Yeah, they looked weird.
Hard pass.
I always felt it was kind of like it's like a Beauty and the Beast thing. Like when the beast turns into the human, it's the same kind of like aversion that you have. Like, ugh, go back to being the beast. Weird. It's like more that for me.
I feel like Pixar has had a human problem for a while too.
Yeah. If you go back and you revisit the early Pixar films, like the first Toy Story, and you look at Sid from the first Toy Story versus the humans that they have in Toy Story 4 or whatever they're on now, huge difference. Much less uncanny to Austin's point. Like everybody just does look kind of like uncanny and creepy, I think. And maybe it's just harder to do masculine faces than it is feminine faces. I don't know. I'm not an animator, but there's something there for sure. It's a little.
I mean, I thought Farquaad was just supposed to look creepy because he's supposed to look like Michael Eisner.
Right.
I forgot about that.
Intentionally creepy. And still is. It's like to such a degree that like he's kind of the perfect like meme response to any given thread, I feel like.
And John Lithgow, perfect voice for that.
Perfect voice for that.
Yeah, I forgot that there's that Pete Yorn Buzzcocks cover in the second film, but I remember I used to cover that song when I would play with friends, and my friend's daughter was like, "Oh, it's that Shrek 2 song," and I was like, "What?"
That's so funny. Well, no, the Eels lead singer has a story about how like his kid was potty training and had its like first successful BM to like one of the songs on the Shrek soundtrack and was like upset, like that's you, Dad. Like I want to sing on the Shrek soundtrack or some weird thing.
I don't know how
Like
to respond to that.
He tells his story in an interview, like, yeah, my kid, like that's how he knows about my band.
So on the Shrek 2 soundtrack, we were talking about how the Shrek 1 had proven that this soundtrack format works, right? So they were able to get David Bowie and they were able to get Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and Tom Waits. They were also big enough to reject the Pixies. So there is only one, I think, released song by the reunited Pixies with Kim Deal called Bam Thwok. And the story is that they were asked to record a song for Shrek 2, and Shrek 2 passed on it. And that is the only song that you have from the Pixies with Kim Deal since they got back together and then she left again.
Wow. So is Shrek responsible for them splitting up again?
Maybe indirectly, or maybe Kim Deal was like, yeah, it's not a good song and I'm out.
We can't prove that they're not responsible, so.
Yeah, Shrek, the producers of Shrek, they rejected them, and then Kim Deal was like, well, if we're not good enough for Shrek, then we shouldn't be making new music.
I mean, there is no life after Shrek. I feel like Frank Black would turn in the most inappropriate song for that homework assignment. I don't like the Pixies are so not kid friendly.
But he did a great song for the Powerpuff Girls soundtrack.
I did not know that. That is news to me.
It's a fantastic song.
So interesting. Somebody knows the real reason, and I would love to know the actual tea.
Why they passed on it or why Kim Deal left?
Both, but mostly why they passed on it.
Because it's not a very good song.
Mm.
They released it as like an iTunes like single. So I was like, oh, Pixies. And I bought it. I was like, I see why they passed on it.
What do we feel is like the most maybe 2000s dated song on this soundtrack? Because I feel like there's a pretty broad mixture of, artists from the 70s, from the 80s. It's like a pretty good span, but then there are definitely some things that feel connected to that era. aside from Smashmouth, because I feel like we can't include them in this conversation.
I was gonna say, Smashmouth.
Aside from
Smashmouth, yeah, maybe.
The
obviously
Baha
that's
Men?
the thing that puts them there. What's that?
Oh yeah.
The Baha Men?
The Baha Men is what
Yeah.
I was gonna say. I'm like, okay, only in like the year whatever, like 2002, would you pick the Baha Men to be on your soundtrack?
Yeah. Maybe Accidentally in Love as well, like Dashboard Confessional. But
Yeah, I was gonna second Dashboard Confessional. One of those like acts that just I can't deal with in any form whatsoever.
They were big business at this time, though.
They were huge.
They had the
Huge.
Spider-Man 2 end credits song.
I know, huge, bizarre, but
Opening for you too.
yeah. What was that guy's name? Chris Carrabba. Did I
Yeah,
get it right?
also very fun to sing at the top of your lungs.
Yeah.
It's good, like, I'm about to fall asleep in the car. I need to wake myself up, so I'm just going to do Dashboard Confessional karaoke for like half an hour.
Well, yeah. I mean, considering Chris Carrabba doesn't have like a voice that is hard to replicate, like you can just scream it out, and you're kind of doing the same thing.
Oh, that's the whole point of that band.
Respectfully.
No, I mean, have you seen the Dashboard Confessional Unplugged where it's just like the audience singing along to every song like the whole time?
Yeah,
It
I
just
think
sounds
that's
like
the whole.
campfire sing-along,
Yeah, it's like you're at a church youth group.
pretty much.
Respectfully.
Vida Loca was also like very much a moment in time as well. Like
Yeah.
that one was like absolutely on the nail of like that year.
Also Frou Frou.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of connections here between this and kind of the Garden State soundtrack for me. I feel like there's a lot of kind of weird Venn diagram overlap where I can see certain songs being on both, which feels very weird, but I think just kind of speaks to the era that we were in.
Yeah, I could see Pete Yorn in a Zach Braff vehicle.
100%.
I believe the soundtrack supervisor for the second film was Chris Doritas, who I believe was a KCRW DJ at one point.
Oh, he for sure was. Remember him fondly. That's so interesting. I mean, I wanted to pick this because I kind of like thought it would be fun to bust on, and that was my original like, oh, this will be just like silly to talk about and to go back and to look at some of these kind of like early aughts artists. But it actually made me realize that there are some things about the Shrek soundtracks for 1 and 2 in particular that were kind of like important and felt new. And there is no shortage of like thinky pieces or Reddit threads where you can find people that will full-throatedly advocate for the Shrek soundtracks being like goated. Like these are the best soundtracks of all time. And people mean that when they say it. So I don't know. I just kind of wanted to like feel it out. Why or why not do we feel like the Shrek soundtracks are important?
for me, I think when the movies came out, like, and when I was a little bit older, I guess I really loved soundtracks as a way to discover new artists and things like that. So I feel like this was kind of right around the time where I was buying a lot of movie soundtracks or TV soundtracks and learning new music that I wouldn't really have found otherwise. So I think the eclecticness of it I like, even if it is that weird range of music from Smashmouth to Leonard Cohen or Rufus Wainwright. But yeah, I think that's what appeals to me about it. And I think it's still what appeals to me about it.
How about you, Brandice?
I mean, I've already said my piece. I just wish that they like took what was like quote unquote revolutionary about this and what was irreverent and they just drilled down a bit more.
Yeah, and I think, where the Shrek movies made today, I think you would get more of that approach. I think this kind of speaks to a moment where people were figuring it out. And this hadn't really been done in animation before. And you feel a little bit of that tension, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. I think as a sum of songs on a couple of different soundtracks, I think I'm with Austin. I think the reason why I had kind of unrealized nostalgia for this is because it really was a gateway for a couple of things and a couple of like cool discoveries for me. Because I'm certain at this time, like I was not a young person like deep in the Leonard Cohen catalog. And now I'm like so grateful that I am. And I have Rufus Wainwright to thank for that, and his cover of the song to thank for that. Had that not been included, and so like the mass availability of this, who knows? It probably would have taken a lot longer. Even though Rufus Wainwright, I guess, was like super bummed out that he had to feel obligated to play this song.
Yeah, didn't they also like kind of force him to do it? Like, hey, you've got an album coming out in 3 months. Like, can you put this song on a soundtrack?
Yeah, I mean, I think he feels weird about it, right? Because it's first of all, Leonard Cohen is a legend, a musical legend, and so I think it was not his favorite thing to do, and it's not his favorite thing to be associated with because it's not his. But the upshot of that, I guess, is that for the normies like us that were in our blockbuster videos with our illegal case of Smirnoff Ice, this was a nice discovery.
Yeah, I think that Shrek is kind of this weird like unicorn where like it shouldn't work as well as it did, both as a story and both musically. Like, I don't like All Star, but it works so well at the beginning of this movie. And, I'm usually not a fan of like these kind of jukebox sort of soundtracks. A lot of them are covers, right? But it all works. So it's one of those things where like it shouldn't work, but it works. And then I think the legacy of Shrek made me kind of resent Shrek for a while, because like all these animated movies started doing all these pop culture references, and they started loading up the soundtracks, and it was just like all these diminishing returns. So it was kind of nice to go back and revisit Shrek for just enjoying Shrek. And I really enjoyed the first movie. The second one I enjoyed until like maybe like the last 20 minutes. Kind of jumped the shark for me. But
oh wait, hot take. Why didn't you like the last 20 minutes?
I don't know. Like I really liked it until they started watching them on TV, like the Gingerbread Man and all them when they got involved, and I was like, oh, I guess we're gonna do a Mission Impossible thing. We're gonna make a joke about wearing women's underwear. Like, okay, I guess. I guess the climax just didn't work for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say
really
it's
big
like
Gingerbread Man.
When the tension gets the hottest, at the ultimate like climax, you're like, nah, now you lost my attention.
Kind of. But I definitely resent them for like making all these animated films have like these big like musical numbers at the end where like everyone just starts dancing.
Oh, see, I will never complain about that.
Oh, you won't?
I love a good dance party at the end of a movie.
Maybe it's the Ricky Martin that bothered me.
Fair.
Because I definitely didn't mind it as much at the end of Minions, where it's, I think, the Bee Gees.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely like, oh, you got that from Shrek. But at least that movie ends with like a dance recital, so
yeah, and
it makes more sense.
I think it's kind of become a hallmark of Dreamworks movies in large part to have these kind of increasingly weird musical touchstones. That I don't know if anyone's seen Minions Rise of Gru, but in Minions Rise of Gru, that they have the Minions singing "You Can't Always Get What You Want" by the Rolling Stones, but they're like singing it in Minionese. It's really stupid, but it's also really funny to me. So I think, I don't know, there's just an element of like fun and whimsy and unexpected that kind of filters into these movies. And I also kind of don't mind like a big karaoke dumb dance party because it's fun. It's fine. I'm okay with it.
Their Barbara Ann cover is also very good.
I mean, it isn't.
Yeah, I've gone soft. That's what it is, really.
It's an animated film. They're allowed to have fun, guys.
No, I watched too many Pixar movies where you're supposed to be crying at the end.
That's what? That's
geez.
the other thing too, is like, doesn't this kind of feel like the anti what we know of like modern Pixar films, which I love. I love Pixar and I love everything that they do with storytelling. They're brilliant, but they are really fucking sad. Sometimes I don't want to cry at like some super emotional part of myself that's being like actively manipulated by Wall-E. Like, shit, life's really depressing. Pixar, you're right. Man, those movies are hard to watch. I watch them with my kid, and he'll be like kind of okay, but I'll be like experiencing 20 different, like really horrible things and trying to hold it in.
Yeah, there are like 2 bawling points in every single Pixar and like Pixar-esque Disney film. It's the first 5 minutes because that's how you get attached to the main characters, the parents die. And then there's like the climax where some other sort of like huge sad like moment happens, like guaranteed.
I've seen
And you didn't see that in any of these Shrek
Yeah,
films.
I've seen Up one time. One.
Oh yeah, no, Up is like brutal.
But whereas like with Shrek, right, like infinite rewatchability, there's nothing serious about Shrek. There are no stakes in Shrek. It's silly and goofy and bright and fun. And maybe that's what people really like about it, is that kind of like two-dimensionality of like there being really it's just fun. It's a parody. It's ridiculous. People I think like that about some of these like late 90s, early aughts movies too, that really capture that like nobody's worried about anything kind of moment, and now we're just worried about everything. So maybe that's where like the meme culture and the nostalgia stuff starts to kind of wrap in. Maybe people want to revisit Shrek for those reasons. Shrek's important, guys.
Yeah, that was very beautiful.
Those like Reddit threads that Nicole is mentioning about all the people who are like standing for the Shrek movies and the soundtracks, those are really like all of her different like burner handles, guys.
Yeah, it's just
all Nicole having conversations with her.
All of those are me. I'm the moderator of the Shrek fan group on Reddit.
All right, so our final question for today. So the Shrek soundtracks have a lot of covers. Some, like the Rufus Wainwright one, we may like a lot. What is one cover song that you think is as good or better than the original? And we know Brandice's answer is Hurt by Johnny Cash.
Oh, so this is any song, not just like on these soundtracks.
Correct.
Yeah. I hate you for that
totally
comment.
missed my dig at you.
No, I got it. I was just like confused because I was like, that's not in this film.
Brandice doesn't have her camera on because steam is coming out of her ears.
It is. I hate all covers of Hurt. There should only be one version, and that is for Resner's. Thank you.
This is a hard question because
I can't think of an answer.
I have multiple.
They're supposed to be hard questions. The final question is always supposed to be a hard question
when
we remember to do it.
Hitting. There's a cover of Bowie's Let's Dance by an artist called M. Ward that I've always really loved, because I think any good cover needs to bring something different to the table. And it's very slow down tempo, like slow burn. I've always really loved that version. Is it better than the original Let's Dance? I feel like Let's Dance is such a like glossy 80s kind of thing. You almost can't imagine it being slow. And so I love that pivot. God, there are so many things that I love that Cat Power has done, because she is famous for doing covers. Her Sea of Love cover is incredible. You know, Nirvana's cover of like, In the Pines is incredible. I feel like there are a lot of answers to this, and I would need a lot longer to think about it.
My mind has suddenly gone blank of all covers. I can't think of a single song that exists.
Off the top of my head, this by no means, I think, if I had time to think about it, would be my answer. But off the top of my head, and super timely with like how big Stranger Things made Running Up That Hill, I actually prefer the Meg Myers version than the original one.
Whose cover of that song? You say Meg Myers?
Yeah. I wasn't familiar with her at all. I just like heard like the cover of that song and I was like, oh, I really like this. And I wasn't that familiar with the original either, but definitely upon hearing the original now ad nauseum on the radio because of Stranger Things, I'm like, oh yeah, I really like Meg Myers better.
That's a hard song to cover. So I'm going to look that up because I'm not familiar with it either. Placebo has a good one. I actually like the Placebo one quite a bit. Ryan, what's your answer? Yours is the answer that I'm waiting on.
Oh, I'm still trying to think of what my answer is going to be. I think I had an answer and then I forgot it.
You premeditated this question to ask the group and then you didn't have an answer.
I can't ambush you with this question and I'd be like, I already thought of mine. Mine's great.
I would have done that.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a hard question.
I mean, I do love Pavement's cover of Echo and the Bunnymen's Killing Moon.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good answer. Very Ryan answer.
Which most people know from Donnie Darko, the original. I was trying to think of something that was like a little bit more known by more than like one corner of the internet, but that's what I've got.
This is a niche. We're fine. I think we're okay at this point. Talking about things for only like very small corners of the internet is kind of like what we do. So
yeah, that's true.
Shrek, not counting this episode about Shrek.
So have you guys watched Shrek the musical by any chance, or did we top out after the third?
I'm really notoriously bad about knowing about musicals and watching musicals, so tell us more.
Yeah, well, I it was on Netflix for a while, that's why I asked, but I feel like it was another one where I watched it and then I was like, I wish I hated this more, but I don't.
Who's in it?
I didn't even know this existed.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it exists. Let me quickly look into this here. It was, let's see, how long did it play?
It was 2008 to 2010 on Broadway.
Yeah. With, oh my gosh, his name is escaping me. Brian Darcy James played Shrek. Sutton Foster was Princess Fiona. So it's like kind of a stacked Broadway cast, to be honest. And he was full makeup.
Yeah, one of the few people I'm familiar with from that scene, and she is fantastic. So if she was in it, that's great.
Yeah, I feel like that was how I felt watching it or listening to it. Is like, I wish I hated this more. So like, I'm not that mad about it.
How did they act? Like, what were the numbers like? Because did they do?
I honestly, I don't know it well. I just kind of more asked it as a joke more than anything, because it's not something that I'm super familiar with. I did toy with the idea of trying to find it again to watch it before we recorded, but it looks like a lot of the music. Like, I'm trying to look at it.
Seems like a lot of original songs inspired.
Yeah, it's mostly original. It was
nominated for 8 Tonys.
Tonys, wow, hey.
It does, of course, end with "I'm a Believer" as the encore.
Wow. Naturally.
If this isn't in any way related to people who worked on Spamalot, I am 1,000% here for it. I can totally see the people who did Spamalot like doing something like this and it being amazing.
Good point.
Mm-hmm. It looks like a lot of original songs. And there's also something called the air guitar crossover.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that always gets me and that I kind of want to see is how they're doing when they make that translation from animation to live action, how they're doing the prosthetics and the makeup. And so now I'm just kind of like sitting here Google imaging what the characters actually look like. And can I tell you that they do not please me? I am disturbed.
No, it's a little bit upsetting. You got to imagine, though, that you're like, in a theater and you're at a distance.
I think I would need to be very far away from this prosthetic Shrek.
Getting the cheap seats
and wrong. It's like one of those like AI, like you put it through like an AI like Illustrator filter, right? You put it through like DALL-E or something, like make me a human version, like a real life Shrek, and it's just really, really scary.
It's what ChatGPT would create if you described Shrek.
100%. Oh, like, very scary. Google image it.
Yeah, this is definitely like some Jim Henson like area of like, this will be in your nightmares and never leave you.
Well, yeah, and also like I just want to point out that Donkey is literally just in like a Party City donkey onesie. So you have Shrek in like full prosthetics and makeup, and then Donkey is like a guy in a onesie. Looking like a Lake Avenue Halloween costume.
And Farquaad is just as creepy as.
See, this is why I watch musicals. People are going to be so mad at me. Like, no, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to Broadway, and it was.
I don't think it gets too much love. I think you're fine.
The Shrek musical fans won't come for me.
Yeah, if Austin's not fighting for it, then I think you're safe.
I mean, it wouldn't be me if I didn't quickly tie it to Broadway somehow, and also get out of the really difficult cover song question, because I don't have an answer.
I was good. It was a nice way to evade. Good evasive maneuver.
Yeah, just dodge that one.
Well, thank you, Austin, for coming back to our podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was fun.
And you guys are still doing new episodes of I Hate Your Taste in Movies?
We are still doing episodes. We're on a bit of a pause right now, a bit of a hiatus. Life kind of got in the way, but I think we had our 100th episode not too long ago, so there's a pretty good back catalog, and hopefully we'll be back releasing new episodes soon. We release them on Tuesdays, and you can find them anywhere.
And where can we find you guys on social?
Oh, yes, of course. We are on Twitter at I Hate Your Taste or on Instagram at Hate Your Taste Pod.
Very cool. And you can find us on Twitter at soundtrack_your and on Instagram at soundtrackcast. And you can wait for when I go on vacation and Nicole brings up another silly movie topic for us to cover. I mean, we're going to have to cover Shrek at some point. It
was inevitable. Why prolong it, you know? I just accelerated the inevitable. That's all.
And once again, thank you for coming back. We always love having you on.
Oh, thanks for having me. I hope I contributed something.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And congrats on the 100th episode.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, congrats. and you know, now you're officially part of the SCU, I think. So.
Oh, all I ever wanted.
That's contributed.
Yeah, I bet you didn't even think that was going to happen today.
I didn't. I did not think about that.
Well, have a good week, everyone, and we will talk soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.